Good morning, everyone. Hi there. This is Cindy Liu, founder of CHRO Mastermind Groups, and I'm joined with Angela Chen Simony. Did I say that right?
You did perfectly.
All right. So I'm going to have Angela tell you a little bit about herself, but today we're going to be talking about career pathways. And this is a topic near and dear to my heart because it literally saved one of my companies 1 year. So Angela's going to do a deep dive into this topic. She has been requested many times to present on this, and we were so fortunate to have you here, Angela, to present to our group. So while you're introducing yourself, everybody please say hello to Angela in the chat and welcome her to our CHRO live show.
Thank you, Cindy, so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be speaking on this subject. So briefly about me, I'm a 30-year career HR professional. I've had a tapestry of experiences across sectors, across life stages of organizations, from startup to organizations even in decline. Small ones, mature ones, and everything in between, for-profit, nonprofit, professional services, consumer product goods, technology. I've never been anywhere longer than 3.5 years, Cindy. So my resume looks like that of a millennial. And for a long time, it was a liability because people were like, she can't hold down a job. But now I believe that the mosaic of those experiences actually works to my benefit, and it's no longer taboo. So folks are definitely trying to find places where they can have value. And when the value proposition runs out, they have the freedom to move on, which I think is one of the really lovely shifts in the career landscape these days. So happy to talk about how people can chart their own path.
Yeah, thank you. I think that that shows your agility, right? Ability to switch gears, go
Great
from
spin.
right CPG to publishing. So hello, Amy Messer-Smith. So nice to see you. You guys are Frito-Lay alum, I believe. I don't know if you guys
Oh,
know
okay.
each other. Yeah. Hello, Elizabeth. Good to see you. So we are going to jump right in. I'm going to share. Angela's going to share her screen here. So if you're in the audience, give us a quick thumbs up or a hello so we know, number one, where you're dialing in from, but also that you can see our screen. This is newer technology for us, so a little bit of a delay here. Okay, yes. Looks like they can see our screen.
Wonderful.
All right, Angela, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you. So Cindy and I were talking. We were, just talking about a whole variety of things, not just those things in the world of HR, but it did start with a conversation about career pathways, as you heard Cindy say. And this is a system that I designed 3 organizations ago. And what I find probably most compelling as you join us today is that it's completely DIY. You don't need a multi-million dollar human capital management system to implement. You don't need a legion of HR folks to do it. You'll see that the framework I'm going to share with you is intentionally preserved in an Excel spreadsheet to really drive home the point that this is something that you can do on your own. And what's fascinating is that since the first time I designed it with my team, now with the advent of AI, it dramatically shortens the time to implementation. So I'm really, really fascinated about that. So I'm not sure entirely who's in the audience, but I'm just going to go through some basics around why career pathing is important. First of all, attraction and retention. So the first time that I built this at my previous organization, I was doing exit interviews. It was just as the Great Resignation was cresting, and I wanted to understand why people were choosing to leave this organization as I was choosing to join. And the first and foremost response I got was lack of career development. So people couldn't envision themselves in a role beyond the one they were inhabiting today. And I thought to myself, that's a problem I can solve. If they had said pay was number one, that would be a lot trickier. But career development is absolutely something I can tackle. So attraction and retention is one of the reasons why career pathing is important. Job satisfaction. So if people understand the role that they play, how they can play that to their best of their abilities, and also they can understand the impact that they're making, that leads to greater job satisfaction. And the last point is, of course, performance. When people understand the skills they need to master, then they can apply them most appropriately, and that drives bottom line performance for any organization. So pretty compelling reasons. And yet I'm surprised by the number of organizations that don't have a formally robust career path system. And I would love to hear from all of you. How many of you do have one? If you just want to drop a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you don't have one. So I would love to get a sense of that from all of you.
Yeah, so while they're doing that, Angela, this is this kind of program has saved one of my companies. We're in a professional services environment, and as you know, in that setting, people, that's it, right? Your gross margins, your profits, everything is tied to your people, your top line. And so we were really struggling with our gross margins, and it was a result of like this spike in turnover, so like 50% turnover. And I got some great guidance from some CHROs who were on my advisory board. And it's kind of a long story, but they basically said, you need to put career pathing in place. And I'm like, well, I prefer flat organizations. I don't know why we need all these levels. And they're like, well, if you look at your exit interviews data, your people are telling you that they don't know what's next for them. Mm. And it killed us. And so, but after implementing it 9 months later, our margins improved dramatically, and it literally saved the day. So I'm super passionate about this topic, and would love to hear all the details, especially the DIY part.
Fantastic. And I would say too that to some extent, this system doesn't require people necessarily having to continually move up. It also acknowledges skill growth sort of horizontally, but I'll get to that in just a minute. Okay, so the framework. First of all, the system is grounded in 3 principles. When I arrived at Harvard Business Publishing, which is the home of Harvard Business Review, and it was my previous role, I found that jobs were all over the map, right? Sales gave out titles like candy, and HR was the most stingy. And there was no clear consistency around what a director meant in one part of the organization, what it meant in another. So I wanted to cure for that. And because of that, it meant that internal mobility was very difficult to map. Right? If you didn't know what was required in another role, it made internal movement very difficult. And what's really fundamentally important about the system is that it coexists with your performance management system. They're clearly intertwined, but this is distinct. So your performance management review system, whatever you call it, OKRs, goals, KPIs, that measures what you did, right? What your accomplishments. This system measures the way in which you did it. It's skill development. I'll give you an example of someone who's a custodian, fantastic custodian, gets year on year, exceeds expectations, and has the commensurate pay growth. And the custodian wants to wonder why they're not getting promoted. And the answer is because they haven't gotten the skills required to be the director of custodial services. And that's what this system does. So performance management, again, measures what did you do for me lately? And this system measures how did you do it? And did you get the skills required so that you can continue to ascend and grow in the organization? The second part of this framework is that there are 3 components. Core, things that apply to everyone, anchored by leadership skills. And then, of course, the discipline or technical roles that are required. And lastly, it's based on 4 different experience levels. When I was doing this for the first time, I was researching what was existing for career paths, and I saw a lot of systems that had 6 or 7, some even 8 different experience levels. And frankly, that's just too granular. And so I really wanted to distill it down to 4, because I think that even your most early manager can pretty easily distinguish who's a beginner and who's an expert. So you have foundational, moving to working, moving to extensive, and moving to expert. Okay, so with that in mind, I'm going to move to sort of what I call the money shot. And this is a build, so you'll get to see the whole thing at the end. But what you see here is what I built out at Harvard Business Publishing, and it's scalable. It can be fewer levels if you're a smaller organization. Of course, it can have many, many more levels if you're a much larger organization. But Harvard Business Publishing had 600 employees, and when I built this the first time, the organization only had 120. And I'm currently building it now for the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which is another media organization, and we only have 40. So this is really fungible and can reflect the size and complexity of your organization. And what you'll see is that there are yellow and white roles, lines. The yellow indicates individual contributor. What I heard loudly and clearly, and certainly what I experienced at the first organization, was that people wanted to be able to grow without taking on formal responsibility for leading others. And the first organization was an automotive technology startup, full of engineers, some of the most brilliant minds in automotive. They held patents, they had white papers, they had PhDs upon PhDs. But they're not the kind of people that you necessarily would want them to manage other people, nor was it something they were interested in doing. So we wanted to make sure that there was opportunity for them to continue to grow without having to take on teams. Now, at some point, right, your overhead in the organization, you don't want to become top heavy. there is a point in this system where you eventually those lanes converge and you have to take on people responsibility. But it's fairly decently high up in the org. It's at a senior director level. So it's important for people to see that they have opportunities to grow both in their profession as well as in pay. But there is a point where it caps out. Okay, and you'll also see that the ABCDEF is the corresponding salary level. So that all comes together eventually. Okay, so for the core, and for us at HBP and at my previous organization, this was tied to our values. This is sort of the no jerk rule, right? That you can't get promoted to CEO unless you're a paragon of our moral excellence. At HBP, we have 3 values: do what's right, do what's hard, and do it with excellence. And of course, you could substitute in your own organizational values. And we intentionally left it to 3. Now, there's actually neuroscience that says that people remember things more easily when they're in groups of 3. So if your organization has more than 3, you have 7 or 8, certainly you can pop them in there. But I would also have you think about how easily those values are applied when the system is so cumbersome. And I'll also get to in a minute why 3 in this system makes a lot of sense. Okay, so as you look at this chart, you'll see that there are colors and there are numbers, and those correspond to the mastery levels. So when I first built this out, in my mind, light blue moving to medium blue, moving to dark blue, then to dark green made sense. It seemed to me a real natural succession. And my engineers were like, nah, that doesn't make any sense to me. They're just colors on a rainbow. And oh, by the way, I'm colorblind. So I added numbers to them. So you'll see in those boxes also numbers: 3, 5, 10, and 15. So the 3 is foundational, 5 is working, 10 is extensive, and 15 is expert. And it's not a calculation, it's not a math, and I'll explain that too in a moment. But you'll see the first line there, coordinator. So if you're hiring someone straight out of school, what we believed at HBP was that we shouldn't have to teach you what's right. So it's a medium blue. It's working knowledge. Whereas the other 2, doing what's hard, doing it with excellence, are at a beginner stage, because those are things that you need to learn and that we are willing to teach you. And so as you move through the ranks, you'll see that the boxes start to stack upon each other. So if you want to move to the next level of individual contributor, each of those boxes needs to progress and needs to move on all the way up, so that our senior executive team, those in dark gray, are all dark green. Because we believe the senior most leaders need to be role models for our values. And so this gives you a sense of how the rest of the system will work. Okay. So the next tranche then is the technical competencies, and we limited those to 5. And you'll also see that they're generically labeled: skill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the reason is, if you take the HR ladder, you might have a team of HR VPs, and their skills are going to manifest differently. It is the same 5 skills, but I might be better. I might be a dark blue in a skill that you are not. And again, you'll see that they continue to stack. And so all the way up, you'll see that you move from light blue to medium blue to dark green. Any questions so far?
How did you make the assessment initially of where people were at?
Oh, okay. So that comes after we rolled out the whole thing. So if you would please remind me of that question to make sure that I answer it. But yes, assessment of employees is, of course, that's where the rubber meets the road. Mm-hmm. Okay. So then the last tranche is our leadership. We believe that's the anchor to everything. And I will say that the first time I designed this, I thought it only applied to people who actually had people reporting to them. And of course, as my thinking evolved on this, it occurs to me that people show up as leaders in all different contexts. You could be a scrum leader, you could be a project leader, you could just be part of a team. And so we put in the expectation that even as a coordinator, even at the most entry-level positions of the organization, you needed to lead yourself. So this is the leadership model that we've developed, or they have developed at Harvard Business Publishing, which is leads the business, leads self, and leads others. So you start with leading yourself. Do you say what you're going to do? Do you do what you're going to say? Do you perform at a level? Are you open-minded? Do you have a curiosity? Do you have a learning mindset? And so on and so forth. And each of those things is defined. And I'll share with you what that means. Now, before I move on from this, though, I want you to take a look at the 2 lines that make up a director. One, the individual contributor, and one that's a people leader. And you'll see that those lines are different. The one that's in white, the director that has people leader responsibility, the emphasis shifts over to leadership competencies. I ask for fewer technical depth from the individual contributor than I do from the people leader, because that makes perfect sense, right? I expect that someone who leads people to use those leadership skills to leverage and unleash the talent of the people on their team. I don't need them to be as expert technically as I want the people on their team. So there's a shift there. Now, the other thing is going back to the numbers, right? So the dark blue equals 10 points. And so an individual contributor director needs 3 dark blue boxes, 10, 10, and 10, which equals 30. It does not mean, however, that that same person can have 2 at dark green, which is 15 plus 15, which is also 30. They can't overcompensate by being deeper in their technical skills. We are expressly looking for them to be broader in their technical skills. So they need 3 dark blue boxes. They need 3 skills at extensive before they can move on. Now, this program also presupposes that when you get a promotion, you are already demonstrating these skills. This is not potential. So we often hear from early career folks, well, I did it a couple times. I'm ready to have your job. Well, that's wonderful. Go back and do it 998 more times. And then let's talk about your promotion.
So
the other thing, oh yeah, please.
Go ahead, finish your thought.
No, go ahead, Cindy.
I was going to say, how did you determine these skills? Did you have to survey the leadership? I mean, how did you get buy-in to,
Yeah. So in a slide, I'll share with you the roadmap for that.
Okay.
So I'll give you the whole blueprint in terms of how you can build this in your own organization. Again, remembering that this is very clearly DIY.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite stories after we implemented this was there was a marketing director and she wanted to come over to HR at the time because she was particularly passionate about DEI work. And so we pulled up the career ladder for HR and we could see that some of her marketing skills were transferable to the HR career ladder, but not all of them. So she came over as an HR manager, knowing that she didn't show up as a director. And it was a really easy conversation. Then we put together a development plan, and 2 years later, she regained the director title. Similarly, had someone who was a really aspiring and ambitious finance professional, probably had 3 dark green boxes, and he wanted to become a director. And this was at the height of COVID. And we sat down, we had a conversation with him. We said, you're not ready. You know why? Because your values are barely light blue. You go rogue, you do things on your own, you don't communicate with your team, nobody knows what you're doing. And until you can show up on the value side as a director, it doesn't matter what your technical competencies look like. And oh, by the way, it's bleeding over into your leadership as well. So immediately he took a pivot and he knew what skills he needed to develop. So this framework not only gives employees a clear line of sight into the things they need to do, it also equips your managers to have what can usually be some of the most difficult performance and development conversations.
Yeah, it really takes the I like you or I don't like you, and that's why you're getting promoted or the position out of the equation and tries to, it's very clear. And I can see how employees would be like, I get it. And
yeah.
Let's work towards that. Awesome.
So this is meant to be really evidence and data based. And so this chart is not negotiable. It looks the same whether you're in sales, whether you're in HR, whether you're in engineering or IT. It is exactly the same. And that's how it facilitates internal mobility, just as that story of the marketing person who came over to HR. Any other questions?
No, but John Briggs, hi John, says mastery levels are spot on. Keep it simple. Awesome.
Yeah, that's right. We wanted people to be able to discern what it looks like. Okay, so what does it actually look like in practice? So this is a subset of what is the HR career ladder at Harvard Business Publishing. We have 5 technical competencies, but what I'm sharing here with you are just 2 of them. We believed that at HBP consultation was an important skill, as is change champion. And you'll see the header across the top is foundational, working, extensive, and expert. And underneath each of those columns, we match that up with a row. And we say very explicitly what it looks like. So if you want to become a director, then we would go to the extensive column and we would say, okay, which of your skills meets the bar of being extensive? And so a sheet like this exists for every single one of the career ladders that we built out. And we had incumbents do the development, right? We wanted people who understood what the day-to-day operations of that role look like. Originally, I got a lot of flack for that. People were like, well, I'm doing the work of HR, right? I don't know how to develop career ladders. But what I was able to say was, fine, I can go to the American Marketers Association and copy and paste the competencies and voila, roll it out. But it's not going to necessarily be relevant to the work that you do. And so part of the roadmap that we did was we built in plenty of time for people to create this on top of the work that's required of their day jobs. Now, what's super interesting is with the advent of consumer grade AI, what took us 4 months to develop can probably be done in, I'm going to overestimate and say 4 days. With the right prompting, I can absolutely fill this out for you. So there's really no reason now why your organization can't find the time to identify the career ladders and then build them out.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Any questions?
Nope. Everybody loves the simplicity and helps with scaling. So clearly you've done it at 40 and you can do it with 600.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. So the blueprint. I started out with the executive team, and I was able to get support because I was solving for a real problem, right? We were having attrition problems. Number one reason was lack of career development. So I went back and I solicited their help. I said, I want you to scan your organizations and tell me what you think all the job families are. So they came back to me in a couple of weeks and they gave me about 50. So working with my OD team, we were able to distill that list to about 20 because y'all just aren't that special, right? There's only a course, especially when you're talking about 5 per role. And so we combined where possible. And again, for 600 people, we had 20 career ladders. In the automotive tech organization, we had 120 employees and we had 30 career ladders because we had so many more that were specialized because it was just very, very highly technical. So that was the first piece of work. The second piece of work was then, okay, now that we know what job families, what career ladders we need, then it's identifying the technical competencies. And again, limiting that to 5. Because as you remember, the entire system has 11, 3 for values, 5 for technical, 3 for leadership. That's already a lot of skills to ask people to develop. So you can certainly broaden that if you had more values, if you thought there was something heavier on leadership. But I would really encourage you to try and keep that as small as possible because again, it's a lot to ask people to move at once. So we took just a month just to brainstorm the competencies without building out any of the detail. And I asked that each member of the executive team serve as a champion. So the COO had a few, the CMO had a few, I had a few, so on and so forth. And we used an iterative process where the incumbents who were asked to serve or some who volunteered to serve would go back and forth to talk about what they thought were the competencies. They could do research, they could copy and paste from other organizations. A lot of them belong to trade associations. And eventually we agreed on what the technical competencies were. Now, not every career ladder had 5. So for example, the administrative career ladder only had 3. So this was not necessarily a model where quantity means quality, but we limited them to 5. So the next bit of work was to build out the mastery levels, right? To build all that detail. And again, with AI, it can be so much faster. As a suggested prompt, you would want to upload information about your organization, the size, your competition, the landscape, because that helps AI to identify what skills you might need. And then have it write out. I have 4 experience levels, help me break it out. And it will spit out something that's definitely good enough for you to start with. And again, iterate that with the executive champions. So we took 9 months in all to build this out. And if I were to do it now, other than, finding time with the right executive champions, it could probably be done in 9 weeks.
Yeah, I could see that, right? Like you could literally do a Zoom call, have it recorded, take the transcript, right? Like the leaders wouldn't even need to spend a ton of time on this, just let them talk out loud.
Correct. So then we rolled it out to the organization. And to the question about how did we assess? So then once the career ladders were done, we obviously needed to do a mapping. We needed to take every employee and see whether or not they were properly titled. And our commitment to the organization was that if you were underperforming, so if you were a senior manager, but really only showing up as a manager, our commitment to you was that we would not demote you. We would not take pay away. We would take the next year instead to develop you so that you did meet the criteria of that level. We didn't want the system to feel punitive. We wanted people to see that as a developmental tool. And
Yeah.
I'm happy to say that 99% of our mapping was spot on. So for that 1%, it was actually that they were underscored. So we had a few promotions come out of it, which was probably the best way to talk about the success of this program.
Right.
But that just proved that the mapping was already pretty good, but we had now just made it explicit. We just made it really clear the ways in which people were showing up.
Yeah,
The other,
I love how you didn't demote anybody and you said we'll take the year to develop you. That's such a powerful message. Awesome.
yeah, it was key to acceptance, right? Because there could be a lot of resistance to this if people thought that this meant bad things for their career.
Right.
The other thing we implemented was that anybody who was to be promoted to a director needed to go in front of a panel of their peers. So other promotions were chain of the command. So if your manager said that you were ready to be a senior manager and your manager's manager agreed and your manager's manager agreed, that was fine, chain of command. But at director level or above, we believed the sphere of influence needed to be so much larger that we wanted directors from other parts of the organization to be able to look across and say, yes, Cindy is ready, or oh my gosh, I can't believe why it's taken her so long. I thought she was already director because she's been showing up in that way. And it's not literally the employee who goes in front of the panel, it's the sponsoring manager who does, just in case, right, the conversation goes sideways. We wanted to be sensitive. But the panel was seated by a member of HR who facilitated and had a vote, and then other directors from across the organization. And importantly, they didn't necessarily need to know the individual, right? That's what kept the integrity of the system, was that they could look at the objective data on the career ladder and then ask probing questions, ask for examples of how that person demonstrated those abilities. To some degree, knowing the person brought in bias into the system, right? Because they had worked with them for so long, or because they found them likable, or knew that they were really kind people. This actually helped to test the system to make sure that was holding up.
No, how
And it
often
was
do you convene the panel?
how often? So we made promotions only twice a year.
Okay.
So once at the beginning of the fiscal and six months between. This also solved for another problem, which I inherited when I arrived, was that promotions just ran all throughout the year. So it was difficult to do any sort of apples to apples comparison, and it just really wreaked havoc on our budget because we couldn't plan. So knowing that it only come twice a year, that meant that managers had to be really intentional and say, hey, look, I think Cindy's going to be ready. Maybe not in July, but I think by January she will be. So we could put that into the budget. We could plan for that. And the manager could be intentional about having that conversation with Cindy and saying, look, I want to put you up for promotion. These are the last few bits I need you to go get.
Yeah.
And if someone didn't pass the panel, we didn't think that 6 months was an unreasonable amount of time for someone to wait for consideration.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I bet the CFO loved you.
Yes, it put a lot of rigor into the system. It made it much more predictable. And of course, we needed to train managers. But again, the tool is pretty straightforward. Right? Again, if you just look at that Excel spreadsheet, it kind of tells you what you need to know about how the system runs. Thank you, Amy, for joining us. So the last bit is, and I'm not going to read these point by point because it's pretty obvious, but what I will say is that having done this system, having created all this content, it created a flywheel for everything else. So when we went to go interview, say, for example, a marketing director, we'd pull up the marketing competencies. We could put it into our interview builder, which would then spit out related questions because we would go and pull and say, okay, I know what a director should look like, and it would create questions out of that. So it also created real consistency in the recruiting process. It also helped our succession planning. I could go across and say, how many people do I see are ready? Because I would have an inventory of all the profiles of employees in the system, and it would know where I had a gap. It would tell me when people were ready, so I knew whether or not I needed to buy or build the next generation of talent. And then lastly, it drove our L&D efforts, right? So if I knew that we had a gap here, then I could go create the content needed to develop people for that skill. So it really becomes central and core to everything else. I kind of don't know how we did all those other things as well as we did in the absence of a program like this. But again, I think what I find most heartening is that you can absolutely do this on your own, and you can do it very, very quickly.
What was some feedback from the employees?
Feedback from the employees was, thank you. Because it was built by their peers, it immediately had gravitas and credibility. So that helped the change management effort so much. And it really has facilitated conversations up and down and across the organization. So very well received.
That's awesome. Angela, thank you for number one, creating this, and then being willing to share it with our audience. You are definitely a multifaceted executive, and You and I got into a conversation about other topics that you like to speak on, and it sounds like a lot of the ERGs and large companies bring you in to speak. What are some of those topics? And while she's describing that, if you have any questions, feel free to drop it into chat. I know there's like a minute delay, like it's really long today. So if you drop it in and we don't get you here live, we'll make sure we come back and answer the question in LinkedIn when it's posted. So
yeah, obviously I'm very passionate about advocating for the AAPI community, as I am myself a member. Cindy, you and I know that less than 1% of the C-suite is occupied by female Asians. So particularly growing up, coming up, I didn't see very many role models, and I have the privilege of having that experience. So I like to pay it back by paying it forward. I'm the only Angela Cheng Simony on LinkedIn. So if you connect with me, please tell me that you heard me join Cindy here on this podcast, and I'm happy to accept and make connections with any of you and talk about how I can come to your organizations and either share this or talk about any number of other really important strategic HR areas.
Angela, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, and we'll look for some of the comments later, but hope that some of you are able to use this. I wish I would have had this 15 years ago when you developed it. It was probably around the same time that we were going through some of those challenges. So,
and if you do, I ask only that you attribute the source material,
yeah.
But let me know your experience if you do end up implementing it in your own organizations.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, everyone.